Welcome to Unleashed, the podcast where we redefine leadership by focusing on what truly matters, the people driving change. Change leadership is about guiding people through transformation in a way that inspires them to embrace change because they believe in it. Whether you're a leader looking to foster a culture of growth or someone eager to break through barriers in life and business, this podcast is for you. Now our host, Wendi.
Welcome to Unleashed. I'm Wendi, and I'm your host. Today's guest is the ultimate problem solver in chaos, Dr. Robyn Lynette, aka Mental MacGyver. With a background that includes being a competitive beach volleyball player, escaping a cult, navigating cartel intervention, and earning a doctorate in business psychology, she thrives at the intersection of executive coaching, therapy, and trusted confidant. If you're a high achiever facing pressure, burnout, or life going sideways, she's the one who can cut through the noise and help you move forward fast. Dr. Robyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you for that amazing introduction, Wendi. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, you have an amazing background. Before we hit record, we talked a little bit about the fact that your background is so incredibly eclectic that we're not going to be able to unpack this in an hour. We're going to do our best. Let's just start with your story. So your story, Dr. Robyn, is anything but ordinary. Escaping a cult, dealing with a cartel, like that's just next level survival. So, what's the defining moment when you realized that you had the power to rewrite your narrative?
Well, the thing I like to tell people, because my story, if you hear it, like I grew up in a really big family. I was married off at 18. I was married off to a man who ended up getting himself involved with the cartel. Like it was a whole big mess. Wow. And people will say to me, "Oh, how did you know you were going to make it through?" I didn't. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. And so I can look back and I can tell you the story and I can tell it very effectively. It takes me like 7 minutes and it sounds like it was really clean, but it wasn't when I was living it. When I was living it, I was just trying to survive. When I was at parties where there were lines of cocaine on tables, I was just trying to not stand out too bad that I wasn't interested in doing cocaine. So I don't want anybody to think, oh, I had it all figured out. No, I did not have it figured out.
Well, unpack that for us. It sounds kind of intriguing, kind of scary, kind of empowering. Like unpack your life for us.
Yeah. So like I said, oldest of 8 kids, graduated from high school valedictorian. Yay me. My dad told me that I graduated valedictorian because it's easy to look like an eagle when you're being compared to turkeys. So basically, It's not because you're smart. It's because other people didn't try. And I grew up with that belief. Like, I'm not that smart. It's just that I happen to work harder or other people don't try as hard as me. And then I was married off to my first cousin. He was 11 years my senior. So 3 weeks later, I graduated from high school, got married, and was moved 3,000 miles from home. He moved.
And was this an arranged marriage? You say
it was. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's interesting because people say, well, you were 18. You had a choice. I was so badly brainwashed and groomed. I didn't believe I had a choice. I remember when my dad came to me and said, "Hey, he asked for your hand in marriage." And I said, yes. And I remember thinking, oh, okay, I guess I'm doing that then. And I paid for my first wedding. My dad paid for like my dress, the cake, and the minister, I think, but I paid for the rest of the wedding myself because, okay, this is the direction I've been set in. I'm a good girl. I do the things I'm supposed to do. So I'm 18 years old and I find myself living in North Carolina, 3,000 miles away from my family with a man I barely know who turns out to not be very bright. He's badly in debt and he has a drug problem. Wow. But those 3 things ended up being silver linings for me. Because he was in debt, he needed me to get a job. And married women in my family don't work outside the home. So now I have a job and I'm realizing, hold on a minute, I can make money. Like, I'm smart enough to have a job. I ended up working in a bank in the back office. So, and because he wasn't very bright, he couldn't maintain the grooming, the brainwashing that had been put in place, saying, you're not smart, you need a man to put a roof over your head, you can't make decisions, like you definitely aren't capable. Like that started to crumble because he wasn't bright enough to be able to hold it. And because the church that my father had chosen for us to go to wasn't as strict, and I never fit in there. Like I never became friendly with the people there. The whole idea of who I was and that my only goal in life was to be a wife and a mother, and the only way I was ever going to get to heaven was to have children, started to fall away. But because the last thing my dad had ever said to me before we walked down the aisle, he said, "You're no longer welcome in my home as a single woman." So I couldn't go home, right? So I stayed because I'm resilient to the point of being stubborn. There is a fine line between the two of those things. And I made a commitment, so I stayed, and I didn't have anywhere to go anyway. But 8.5 years later, my husband threw me out. He told my dad it was because I was lazy. And my dad called and gave me a riot act and said, "If you had been appropriately submissive, you would have been able to make it work. Don't you dare take my name back. You're bringing shame on the family." So I was fortunate. My best friend who I'd met at work had a spare bedroom. She let me move in with her. And then I had to figure out, like, who am I? I've never made a decision on my own. But I have a job. I know how to balance a checkbook. I can figure this out. And I started, playing competitive volleyball, having friends of my own, having my own opinions. And then this is where the cartel comes in. My husband comes back and says, "I made a mistake. I love you. I want to try again." And I said to him, "The last thing you said to me was, I don't love you. I don't want to be married to you. And I don't want you living in my house." Never mind that house was literally a shack. It was a slab of concrete, plywood walls, and a tin roof. I had to cut the grass in the bedroom because it would grow under the wall. And I was living on a catfish farm. No lie, I was living on a catfish farm. And he's like, "Well, let me tell you what happened." What happened? So he starts naming names, talking about people who I remember, like names I know. And he says, "Did you know they were part of a cocaine ring?" And I'm like, "We were at parties with cocaine on tables. Yes, I knew that they were part of a cocaine thing. I knew that." He says, "Did you know that cocaine ring was part of the cartel?" No, did not know that. No.
And probably didn't want to know that.
I'm glad I didn't know that, because what turns out what happened was I had fixed his credit, because he was in debt when I met him. I did a lot of work, got him out of debt, fixed his credit. Well, the cartel, or the little section of the cartel that he got involved with, recognized he had good credit and wanted to steal his identity, which they did. They stole his identity. He almost ended up in federal prison. But they recognized that I did our family finances and I was going to be a problem. I was going to be in the way. And being in the way for the cartel is not a good place to be. But they also realized that the man I was married to was very gullible. And so they convinced him that I was holding him back and he could do better than me. And that's why he threw me out. So if I ever write that book, it's going to be called, "I'd like to thank the cartel for getting me out of the cult."
Okay, so how did the cult play into all of that?
Well, so fortunately at that point, because I was living 3,000 miles away from home and I had been married for 8.5 years, my father had basically written me off as my husband's responsibility.
Oh.
So when my husband threw me out, I'm now, there's no man who's responsible for me, because my father handed me off to my husband and my husband tossed me. So now I'm my own responsibility now.
So you were raised, your upbringing was being raised in a cult, is that right?
Yes, my upbringing was very much, this is the role, this is the way you are as a woman, this is how you have to be, and thou shalt not think anything else. If I want you to have an opinion, I'll tell you what it is, basically.
Wow.
But because I had been given to literally and figuratively given to my husband, and then moved when he threw me out because the cartel didn't like me, I basically was severed from all of it.
And then did you start doing some kind of work with the cartel? Like there was an intervention with the cartel, right? Or how did that?
I did not. The only thing I had with them was that my husband got involved with them, and then they didn't like me and I got kicked out for it. That was my whole thing with the cartel. I was able to get away from them.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So all of that, so from your upbringing to your arranged marriage to, the life that you've described while you were married, what was the defining moment then where you went, okay, I'm now going to flip the coin and I'm going to use all of that to help people with high performance.
I had to make a
my
whole
gosh.
nother mistake before we got to do that. So after that whole story, then I started playing competitive volleyball and, made a little bit of money at it, had a real job to pay the real bills, really good. But then I didn't do enough therapy. I made my own mistake. I married a narcissistic, closeted bisexual. 0 out of 5 stars. Do not recommend. He moved me from Charlotte up to Long Island and then took a job in London, England.
Okay.
And he left me on Long Island to maintain his tax status here in the US and basically run his life. Now, in Charlotte, I had a network. I got headhunted for jobs. On Long Island, I was just a pretty girl with a high school diploma. No one would talk to me. I couldn't get an interview. So my husband at the time says to me, we don't need your silly money anyway. Why don't you just go to college? As long as you're available to come to Europe to host wine tastings and dinner parties and basically be executive arm candy, I don't care what you do. Not what I signed up for when I married him, but okay. So I got 3 degrees in 6 years. I got an undergrad in clinical psychology and a master's and doctorate in business psychology with a concentration in high performance in sport, while flying back and forth to Europe to host wine tastings and dinner parties and look very good in a cocktail dress. Thank you very much. Now, when I finished my doctoral degree, he got transferred back to the US shortly thereafter. It became very obvious that our relationship was not tenable with us living on the same continent. It was a disaster. That divorce was as ugly as you could imagine. I could tell you terrible stories. And I got out of that. And he says to me, men say crazy things to me at the end. He says to me, you'll never make it without me. You're going to live under a bridge in a box. So I get out of that and I have rights to my dissertation, which he did try to take, and rights to my business, which is basically an LLC saying I owned a piece of paper. I paid him $5,000 for that freaking piece of paper.
Yeah.
And I had to decide, okay, what am I doing? How am I making a living? And that's when I decided, okay, I've been a competitive athlete. I've lived through chaos. I can help people make a difference. And so I turned my dissertation into my first book, which is called Stop the Drama, The Ultimate Guide to Female Teams. And I wrote it for female athletes, their parents, and coaches. And I was speaking on the university circuit. And then business people started saying, hey, write a book for us. And that's when I wrote The Ultimate Guide to Handling Every Disagreement Every Time. And so I had this business that I created that was corporate training, public speaking, and executive coaching. Along the way, I met my current husband, who is a phenomenal partner for me. He's a really good guy. Yes, he's a former competitive bodybuilder and trainer on the Mr. Olympia tour. He's a great guy. And, okay, great. My life is kind of sorted. Oh, then COVID happened and my whole business collapsed in 4 weeks.
Right.
The whole thing disappeared. And so that's when I got to decide, what do I really love? What do I want it to look like? And what am I going to rebuild from that? And, my husband and I had a health and wellness business that didn't survive COVID. We had to shut it down. But I was able to rebuild my executive coaching, more speaking, not as much training, and, doing a lot more of take back your competitive advantage and deal with the head trash and manage your self-sabotage and doing that kind of work. And so that's the business I now get to have.
Wow. So, you are truly the picture of a phrase that I say all the time, which is out of adversity comes innovation. And I love how you've innovated into, I love this whole, take out the head trash. And I think that's become one of your signature talks.
Yes.
And so, it's a powerful concept. And so what's the biggest piece of mental junk that you see high achievers holding on to, and how do you help them let it go?
So a big one that I see, and when I say this, people go, oh, what they don't realize is that hyper independence, that I'm going to do it all myself, is a trauma response. It's a response to not having anybody in your childhood, young adulthood, in your life who you could trust to help you, who you could say, this isn't okay, I need help. If you are a person who over explains, if you talk and people are like, yeah, I got it already, trauma response. It comes from growing up in a space where people purposefully misunderstood you. And so being able to start recognizing, where are you hyper independent? Why? How do we make it where you don't feel like you have to do everything, where you are willing to delegate the things? Because what I tell people is, if someone else can do it at 80%, let them do the 80% and pick up the 20% that falls through the cracks. Don't do the 100% yourself. So those are two big things I see.
Oh, Dr. Robyn, that is so like mind blown right now for me because, I tell the story. I started in sales at 16 years old at a retail store. And the reason I chose that store is because I wanted the employee discount, if I was to be really
Fair.
honest. And within a year, it may have been two actually, eventually, very quickly, because I was a top salesperson, I got promoted to assistant manager. I hadn't even graduated from high school yet. And so I
Wow.
was put into this management position and, I felt really good, like, thank you, and I didn't know the assistant manager had just walked out. And so they needed somebody to hand the keys to. And so they did. And that was my biggest, I would say, challenge as a manager is delegation because I still wanted to stay as at that high performing
Yep.
salesperson level. And yet now I had other responsibilities. And so I thought that I was doing everybody a favor by selling and then also doing everything myself. And I would get to the end of the week and I was just like, here I am, 18 years old and I'm completely burnt out. And I always just thought my delegation was a lack of training. I didn't know I was supposed to delegate. I didn't know how. I didn't know how to train. I didn't, I was learning all of these things on the fly. And I never thought of that as a trauma response.
Yeah, it's very much. I mean, I know you've heard people say this. Well, it's just faster if I do it myself.
Yeah.
Right this minute, yes. Every single time for the next 6 months, no.
Yeah.
But being willing to deal with that inner demon of, I have to do it myself. I can't trust other people. I have to make sure that it's right. It has to be perfect. Research is procrastination. Let me learn as much as I can and make sure I know absolutely everything before I actually launch anything is another one I see that goes along with not being willing to delegate. I have to make sure they know exactly how to do this perfectly well before I give it to them.
Which is
No,
impossible.
that's not a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa. So it's interesting because now I'm starting to see as you're unpacking this how, you also talk about as part of taking out the head trash, fighting those demons that are keeping you up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
that totally resonated with me. I'm 56 years old and there really is a 3 a.m. thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've heard
Absolutely.
that it's a cortisol spike. I've heard of a lot of different things. Is there a physiological 3 a.m. cortisol spike or is that chaos? Is it a combination?
So there are a couple of different things. I can talk a little bit of science. That's not what my expertise is, but I know a little bit about it. Yes, you can have a cortisol spike. If you go to bed hungry and your brain doesn't have enough glucose to function overnight, it'll peak cortisol to be able to turn fat or protein, break down your muscles, whatever,
Hmm.
into glucose so that your brain can live. So if you're, a lot of people fast at night. Sometimes if you don't have enough glucose in your system, your body will wake you up because your brain's going to die if it doesn't wake you up and it'll kick cortisol out because that's a
Hmm.
really fast way to create energy. But then your body's wide awake and your brain's like, thanks, I'm good. And your body's like, great, I would like to sleep. So that is a thing. But also what happens, this is the difference between your logical brain and your emotional brain. So your logical brain is your very fact-driven, has access to language, makes decisions you want online for critical thinking.
Hmm.
Your emotional brain is your intuition, your gut, your feelings, your willpower, all that kind of stuff is kind of your emotional brain. No access to language. So if you've ever walked out the door and thought, I'm forgetting something, but I can't think of what it is, and then 20 minutes down the road, you go, oh, right. It's because your emotional brain was like, hey, you're forgetting whatever you're forgetting, but your logical brain doesn't understand feelings and whatever. Your logical brain's like, I know we're missing something. I don't know what. Or if you've ever been in an argument and then thought of the perfect thing to say 20 minutes later,
Always.
that's because in an argument, your emotional brain is really engaged and it
Right.
floods your logical brain. So what happens is that during the day, your logical brain is really busy. There's a lot of language. There's a lot of incoming, whether you're watching TV or you're scrolling or incoming information or outputting, you're writing, you're talking to people, whatever. So your emotional brain is suppressed. We're not dealing with you. Be quiet. I'm focused.
Hmm.
So at night, your logical brain or in the shower, your logical brain finally shuts down. And that's your emotional brain's chance to go, hello, I would like to have an opinion.
My turn.
Right. And that's when you get anxiety
Mm,
for no reason. Like you can't figure out like what is going on because your logical brain is shut down enough for your emotional brain to actually kind of start spewing all these emotions it has.
yeah. So what
So
do you
what
do at that point?
so what you have to do is during the day, you have to give your brain time for your logical brain to quiet, and let your emotional brain have an opinion. So for some people, this is meditation. That works well for some people. What I tell my clients is if you're driving somewhere, turn the radio off,
Mhm.
sit in silence, and just see what happens. Now, I had somebody I said this to, and she called me back the next day. She said, I can't. It's absolute chaos. I said, that's because you never give your logical brain a chance to shut off and your emotional brain time to speak, time to bubble. So if whatever's going on, whatever anxiety is coming up, whatever's happening for you, we need to work on that because you're suppressing it like, the box with the demon in it, you're trying to hold it closed.
Yeah.
Let's stop holding the box closed. Let's open it and start picking it apart in a safe way. So
Mm,
give your mind space for your emotional brain to have an opinion during the day. Meditation, silence, walks, quiet, no
mm.
input, no output, just quiet.
So I'm thinking about a friend of mine that we go to the beach every summer together, and she's the one that has to be on her own in her own room, because we have multiple rooms and we bring a bunch of people and we just have a really fun time. But she's the one that she's actually an executive function coach. And
Mm.
at night, she cannot shut her brain down. And so she has to have the TV going all night long because that's the only way that she can actually fall asleep is with the noise. And
Mm-hmm.
I've always been worried about that. I'm like, no, you got to turn the TV off. It's the opposite.
So it's absolutely a condition for managing her emotional brain. Generally speaking, I don't know her, but generally speaking, if you have to have constant input, it's because you've got some underlying something in your emotional brain that bubbles up when you have silence that you aren't dealing with.
Mm. And so you deal with that through meditation, through quiet,
And
through.
sometimes it's you talk to somebody. Have you ever had a situation
Mm,
where you're talking to somebody and you say something and you realize that sounds really dumb out loud? The reason that happens is because it's the first time your logical mind has had access to it. Is when if you have to take whatever's going on in your emotional brain and put it into words for me, it means that your logical brain is getting access to it because you're finally putting words. And sometimes I have my clients
mm,
Google feeling words list, and you
hmm
can just Google it. Lots of them will come up. And
hmm
I may ask, like, okay, let's pick a word that kind of fits what you're feeling. And that's one way if you're like in the throes of it. But another really good option is to look at those words and kind of think, what would it feel like? What would it look like? What would I know if I felt disappointed, if I felt
mm,
frustrated? So when you're not in the space, actually kind of think about these words. How do they feel? And that way, when something like that happens, your logical brain goes, wait, I know this one. And it can put a word to the feeling.
mm. I used to actually have a feeling list because I went through a parenting course actually that taught how to encourage your kids to really get in touch with how are they feeling because so often that feeling is suppressed.
Mm-hmm.
And my son eventually he almost became a pro baseball player. He played all through college and,
Wow.
paid for his college. And, it's so funny because there were so many times he would go, no, mom, I'm good. And I'm like, people who say they're good or they're fine, we all know that fine stands for freaking insecure, neurotic, and emotional. So that's just a word we do. That's a four-letter F word we do not allow in our home.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he had a really hard time at first. I think he was in middle school and he's like, I can't tell you what I'm feeling. And by the way,
Mm-hmm.
mom, I hate this. Eventually,
Right.
though, we got to the point where there was accountability to if I said, no, I'm all good, he'd go, you're not all good. And it was hard to identify those
Yeah.
emotions. So that is
Yep.
such a good reminder to go
Mm-hmm.
back to if you can identify it, you can
If you can
actually,
identify it, you can do something about it.
yeah, that's huge. So, I love your work, Dr. Robyn, because I also, we all live in this world where it just feels chaotic and it's almost like being busy is this thing
Badge of honor.
it is.
Yeah.
And that's just, the first thing you say to some people, I've just been so busy. I've just been so busy. So this whole thriving in chaos, walk us through
Mm-hmm.
that because you have a whole five-step system kind of thing
I
that
do.
helps with this.
Yeah. My favorite question to ask clients when we kind of get to this space is, what do you want to be different?
Mm,
Because that's a very deep question that sounds really easy, but it's basically
yeah.
saying what's broken, what's not working. Because if I ask you, what's your dream? What's your plan? What's your
Yeah.
goal? You're going to give me this pie in the sky, well
Yeah.
executed. This is what it looks like.
Yeah.
That's nice. We can't work with that.
Mm,
But if I say to you, what do you want to be different? What's not working? Let's talk about the nuances, the nitty-gritty of this chaos. That gives us a place to start. And it lets us figure out, well, if it looks like this when it's broken, then it probably looks something like that when it's not broken.
yeah.
And that gives us a way to kind of say, okay, now we can create a strategy and we can come up with a tactical plan and we can do all of that stuff, which is, basic organizational development. But
Yeah.
it also lets us look at what are the psychological barriers? Where's your self-sabotage? What story are you going to tell yourself? What are the things that you should do? You are not doing them.
Mm-hmm.
That is usually what gets in the way between what do you want to be different and what does different look like.
Yeah. Which, that's the gap, right? That's the
Yep.
gap that we all deal with every single day. And
Yep.
if we don't have someone that actually asks that question, what do you want to be different? Because we can probably identify that. So,
Usually people are good at complaining. So if you can let them get that out and I can pick out, like I use motivational interviewing. That's what it's called, motivational
mm,
interviewing, which is the idea of saying, oh, that's an important piece. Oh, that's an important piece. So I can let people do that and pick out the important pieces and then be like, okay, this is what I heard that you want to be different. And those are the things we can work on. Do you agree?
oh, wow. So if they're having a hard time identifying it, some basic yes or no questions will help them actually get there.
Right. I can just ask them, talk, and I will talk
Yeah.
with them and just get through it. And then at the end, I can say, okay, here's what I'm hearing. Here's what I think we can work on. Does that seem like a good place to start? If we made those
Mm.
things different, would it be better?
Wow. Okay. So I want to walk through a real life example. So, you
Okay.
have a 5 point paradigm for creating success out of chaos,
I
which
do.
just sounds so settling to my brain. So, you deal every single day with high performance people and you help identify high performance hindrances.
Mhm.
Is that kind of an explanation of what you do?
Yeah. So basically, we're looking for the way to be able to take back their competitive advantage. That's what we're looking for. Where
Mm,
where are the gaps? Where are their competitive advantages slipping through? So mental toughness, unstoppable, maximizing their business growth, whatever that looks like. Take back that
okay.
competitive advantage. Absolutely.
Okay, so talk about it, with these high performance individuals, imposter syndrome is one of those things that you talk about. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I could be wrong, it seems like imposter syndrome hits hardest at the top.
So the thing of anyone who doesn't have imposter syndrome is probably an imposter.
Okay.
So the bigger you get, the
Mm-hmm.
more you know and the more you realize you don't know. So it's the people who think they know but they know like this much and they're like, I know all of it. They don't realize that they don't know anything because they know all of it.
Mm,
But if you get out of that little I know everything, it's like being a teenager. I know everything. Then you become an adult and you realize I have no idea what's going on. And
right.
so as you become more and more of an expert, it's really easy to realize there is so much I don't know. And that can create imposter syndrome.
And so, number one, how does one create awareness that what I'm feeling right now is imposter syndrome? And then what do you do about that?
So I would love to share a story with you that is random and doesn't really mean anything, but is a really good example of this. So I was in New York City. I was at an event where they were doing radio interviews and TV interviews for experts. There was it was a whole thing, a whole weekend thing. So the first day we did radio interviews, I talked to, I don't even know how many people, and I became friendly with a couple of different people. So we're getting ready to leave for the evening. And the next day they're doing TV interviews. And as we're getting ready to leave, the people running it are like, look, you're going to be under lights tomorrow. Everybody needs to have makeup on, powder, like you got to do it. That men too, everybody make sure you do your makeup. I'm like, whatever, fine. So I'm walking out and this young woman comes running up to me and she goes, Robyn, you have to help me. And I'm like, oh, okay. And she says, I've never worn makeup. I don't know anything about makeup. I can't do makeup. And I'm like, I'm not a makeup expert. I don't know what. I know nothing about makeup. There are probably 500,000 people in New York City who know more about makeup than I do. And she says to me, Robyn, I've watched your videos. Your makeup always looks good on camera. You know more than I do. Please help me. Now, at that moment, I could have had imposter syndrome and I could have said, I am not an expert in makeup. I have no idea what I'm talking about. But she was right. I did know more than she did. So I could either be the expert for her in her world, like this big. I'm not the expert, but in her world, I'm the expert. And I could help her, or I could say, sorry, you need an expert.
Yeah.
So what I tell people is, can you help the person in front of you? If you can help the person in front of you, you are the expert for them. If you can't, then maybe you need to learn a little more. Maybe that's not imposter syndrome. That's like, I need to learn a little more. Imposter syndrome is I can help the person in front of me and I'm not going to because I don't feel qualified, even though I am, and I can help them.
That's so interesting because as you're talking and I'm thinking about that example, sometimes what I'll do when I realize that I'm going through imposter syndrome and that's what I'm experiencing, I'll look for people who will give me external validation. Like, I'll tell a story of where I am or what I'm doing and in hopes that they will assure me that I have what it takes or I have done it before. Like I'll literally pick up the phone and call a mentor or call my son or is that a healthy thing? What is that? I'm constantly looking for external validation.
Well, so it's a healthy thing as long as you realize that's what you're doing and why you're doing it. It's fine. And if you're in a situation where you could be the expert and you can't get a hold of somebody to say, yeah, Wendi, you're great. You're going to be fine. It's amazing. You've got cheerleader. Yay, yay. Do you collapse or do you push through? Because if you collapse, that means that your internal compass needs some work. Like it needs to be cleaned up a little bit. Got to shine that a little bit. If you can go through it and be like, I can do this. I know how to do this. I'm the expert in this space. I can do this.
Yeah.
Then it's fine. I don't ever have a problem with people having somebody they call and say, hey, give me a pep talk.
Right. Like my son baseball, they'd always pick each other up in the dugout. And I feel like so often that's missing in business and in life that, that person or those people to pick us up, I think is so
You
important.
recognize though, that having someone who you can call and say, hey, pick me up requires so much trust.
It does.
And the further you get into leadership, the fewer people you have around you like that. That's why it's lonely at the top. It's intellectually lonely and it's personally isolating because you don't have people that you can go to and say, I'm lost. I need help. Help me figure this out. Because if you say that to your board, you're going to get a vote of non-confidence. You say that in an investor meeting, they're going to pull your investment. You say that to your employees, they're going to quit. If you're a leader, you need to be the leader. And that's why they hire people like me, because who else are they going to talk to? And I know the answer because I've asked that question to clients. You know what they say? Bartenders, taxi drivers, strippers, the trainer at the gym, the barber. If people need someone to talk to, they talk to the people that are close to them, which are, people who work for them, who trust them. But if you're paying someone in that way and they're not an expert in that, what kind of advice are you getting? What are you looking for?
I never thought about it that way. Well, and is that where self-sabotage comes in? Because I know you also talk about self-sabotage as a high performance hindrance. Unpack that for us a little bit.
Yeah. So self-sabotage can be a lot of different things. It can be, so they all kind of fall under the label of self-sabotage. So imposter syndrome is a form of it. Hyperindependence is a form of it.
Okay.
You can also have ambivalent relationships because those are super toxic. So ambivalent relationships are people who sometimes they're your best friend and they're great and they're fun to be around. And sometimes they tear you down. And sometimes they're like, oh, let me be devil's advocate. And you don't know what you're going to get. If you're keeping toxic relationships in your life, that's a form of self-sabotage. As I say at the end of my TEDx talk, when you learn there's no water in a well, stop going there looking for a drink. So who are the people in your life? And that's part of my 5-point paradigm, right? Is your support system, people, places, things, and habits that are either helping or hurting you. that is part of your self-sabotage. Is how are you dealing with that? What does that look like? I cannot talk about this without talking about the kind of elephant in the room, and that is the business culture of alcohol and self-medication. So many high performers have alcohol, drug problems. Maybe they have a food addiction, whatever it looks like, but they have some kind of crutch that they lean on that is physically damaging to them. That is a form of self-sabotage. And that can be a really tough one to talk about. Ignoring your health, ignoring your sleep, ignoring your well-being, self-sabotage. Those are the not fun, sexy, oh, let's talk about this. Those are the tough ones.
Yeah. So you clearly work with a lot of high performers, and whether it's high performers in life and business and, a lot of different contexts. For our listeners who are listening right now going, some of these things are resonating with me. How can high performers recognize when they're getting in their own way, and where do they start?
So I think we know when we're getting we're in our own way. Like, we can recognize when we start seeing patterns of behavior. How does the saying go? You keep meeting the same person, they're just wearing different pants. We keep making the same mistakes. We keep doing this, the same reminder. Like when you asked me at the beginning of this, how did you become a high performer? Oh, I had to make another mistake before that was a thing. Right?
Yeah.
And if you end up on a plateau, if you end up in a place where you're like, I've been doing all this stuff, it's been good, things are getting better, but now I'm stuck here and I'm not moving forward and I'm not happy and this isn't what I wanted it to be, and all of the things that come with losing your competitive edge. That's when you start recognizing maybe the problem is me. And a lot of times people will hire just a regular executive coach. And I don't say that with disdain, but someone who will help them with leadership and communication and conflict resolution and all of those really important things. And then they're like, I don't feel more fulfilled. I'm still not. Or they'll go to therapy, which is awesome. I have nothing but awesome things to say about good therapists. Not everybody's a good therapist, but about good therapists. But then, they're talking about their past and they're like, I don't need to hash out my mother anymore. I need to learn from that. So the thing I like to tell people is never feel shame about the person you had to be to become the person that you are, but become the person you're supposed to be. Don't get stuck in the person that you were. And so they get to this point where they're like, I know I have more growth. I know I have a competitive edge I'm not pushing. What does it look like to do that? And that's where they get stuck, and they have to start kind of asking those questions. Am I self-sabotaging? What does that look like? What are my relationships? What do I want to be different?
Yeah. So, many high achievers hit a point, I think, where, as you mentioned, kind of traditional therapy or coaching just doesn't cut it. So why is your approach, what does your approach work for people who have really kind of tried everything?
The reason that I'm different is I've been through chaos, right? I've seen it. I know what it looks like. And there's no such thing as TMI for me. Like my clients can literally come to me with anything and we'll be like, okay, we'll figure that out.
Right. You can't be shocked. I think you're that kind of person that just
no, whatever. I've seen. Now, if you come to me and you're like, my wife and my girlfriend ran into each other in the store. I'm like, okay, you're creating your own chaos. Let's work on that. Right. So does it mean that I never call people out when I think they're doing things that are creating their own chaos? No, I do. Just like someone said to me, Robyn, you are resilient. Stop making decisions that make you prove it. If people are making decisions that are making them prove that they're resilient, we're going to talk about that. But that's what makes it different, is that I come with the compassion and the nurturing and the trust of a best friend. And I bring the skills and the knowledge of business psychology and therapy and all of the pieces that I bring to the puzzle. So I don't come and say, I'm going to build you this house. Here's what it looks like. You're going to get XYZ bedrooms, whatever. What I do is I have a box of tools. I can build pretty much anything. Let's work together and figure out what your house should look like and build it together.
Yeah. Well, and is that where you coined the name that you are most known for, and that is the mental MacGyver, which, as we talked about before we hit record, one of my absolute favorite Guys on TV.
So that came from, I was working with someone who had successfully exited a marketing and branding firm. And we were doing some stuff together. And at the very end of the call, he jokingly said, "You just need some string, some bubble gum, and a button, and you could make it work." And I laughed and I said, "Yeah, I'm kind of like the mental MacGyver." And I thought it was just a joke. And he got really serious and he goes, "You need to use that. That's exactly what you do. You take whatever's there and you make it work. You figure it out. That's what you do." And I'm like, yeah. He's like, "No, I'm serious. If that's available, you need to use it." So my husband owns a graphic design, website design company, and he's my web guy, obviously. So I texted him while I'm on the call with this person. I'm like, "Hey, can you check and see if mentalmacgyver.com is available?" And like 4 or 5 minutes later, I get a text back. He says, "Okay, so we own that URL. What are we doing with it?"
Well, here we are.
Here we are.
Oh, that's so good. Dr. Robyn, what legacy do you want to leave? Because it sounds like you are doing so many amazing things with so many people and just helping people get past some of their hindrances. So how will you know that your purpose on this earth has been fulfilled? What legacy do you want to leave?
I can tell you my purpose probably will never be fulfilled because I'd have to live 1,000 lifetimes to do all the good that I want to be able to do. But for me, if I can continue to touch people and give them that the aha moment, the one that I saw in your eyes when I said hyperindependence is a trauma response.
Yeah.
That moment of people going, "Hold on a minute, what? You're talking to me."
Yeah.
If I can do that consistency, whether it's from the stage or working with my clients, then I feel like I'm living my purpose. I'm making a difference. I'm helping people not make the mistakes that I've made, or at least stop making the mistakes that I made.
Yeah. So, I always like to leave our listeners with an action item, or, I'm sure so much of this is resonating as people are listening. Where do they start?
They start with, what do they want to be different?
Mm-hmm.
That's where you start. You start with, because I have a project I do with clients called the Foresting Project. And it's because when our life is a whole forest, we have so much going on and you can't look at the individual trees because you're so deep in the forest.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we can find a way to look at the individual trees and say, this one needs fertilizer and that one needs pruning and that one needs to be cut down and I need to plant one over here. It gives us a place to start. It gives us a way to get out of the woods and look at the individual trees. And so that question, I said it was the most powerful. It absolutely is. What do you want to be different? And then pick something and make it different.
Yeah. And write it down and do something different.
Or find somebody that can help you. I know everybody and their brother thinks that they're a good coach. The coaching world is a very deep pool full of very shallow people.
Yeah.
Just because you've worked with someone and it didn't value you, it didn't help, doesn't mean you aren't good at coaching. It means you hired the wrong person. Find somebody who can help you.
Yeah. Such good advice. Well, Dr. Robyn, I know there's going to be a lot of people who want to contact you. So we will make sure that all of your information is in the show notes. What is the best way to contact you?
So if you go to my website, mentalmacgyver.com, you're going to find lots of different options there. But I'm also on LinkedIn. I have a YouTube channel. There's a lot of things, but my website is a real easy way. There's a contact page. There's a link to my calendar. That's a good place to go directly.
Great. So good. Well, Dr. Robyn, thank you so much for your time, for your investment in people and just making them better one person at a time, making the world better one person at a time. I just appreciate so much you being a guest on the show.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to Unleashed with Wendy Swanson. Make sure to subscribe and follow to be notified when the newest episodes of the podcast go live. Please take a moment to rate and review us. It helps others discover Unleashed and join our movement of forward-thinking leaders. You can find contact information and important links in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode, and remember, keep leading with authenticity, embrace change, and choose to live life unleashed.